If your creative push has helped you, you can help the show by shopping on Amazon.com. All you have to do is head to yourcreativepush.com/Amazon. That will take you right there, and you can shop how you normally would. A small percentage of your purchases will go directly to helping cover the costs of creating, hosting, and maintaining your creative push. And especially with the holidays coming up, you can make a big difference just by buying the things you were going to anyway. Again, that's yourcreativepush.com/Amazon, and thank you for thinking of the show and for helping out. Your Creative Push, episode 269.
That is the difference between successful artists and not successful artists, is the successful ones just keep going.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Shayla Maddox. Shayla is an artist who uses light as her medium, and along with acrylic, sand, salt, crushed glass, seashells, quartz, candle wax, and even cinnamon, she creates what she calls light reactive paintings, which change appearance throughout the day, season, and year. And I was introduced to Shayla from our good friend Gwen Siemel, who's been on the show before and who's actually going to be on next week. But Shayla comes on the show to talk about how when she was an actress, she decided to make one painting and how she never looked back. And then she takes us along her journey as an artist, and it's a brave one. She tells us about her decision to stop showing at traditional galleries and to start throwing her own shows. She tells us some of the things that surprised her when she decided to throw her own shows and her advice for anyone who is thinking about doing the same. Shayla talks about her own work, her light reactive paintings, and how she is intentionally experimental in her art. She talks about her fascination with thin spaces and her interest in exploring the intersection between science and spirituality, and also some of the frustrations that she encounters when she tries to share her work on the internet. And finally, we take a deep dive into Patreon and how Patreon has encouraged and enabled her to communicate with her audience in a new way, and also the experience of attending PatreCon and what she learned there. Tons of inspiration in many different forms in this one. Shayla just has a great mindset when it comes to challenging herself and also challenging the norm. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with the talented Shayla Maddox. Shayla, welcome to Your Creative Push.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to kind of get into your art. I think that you do this very unique thing with your art, and I also appreciate kind of the way that you handle yourself as an artist to try to convey your message in different ways about the actual process of being an artist. But before we get into kind of all that, I like to give everybody that's on the show an opportunity to share your story, kind of how you got to the point you are today as a creative person.
Well, gosh, I guess it's a sort of a long story. My mom was an artist. She did all kinds of things when I was growing up, painting and stained glass. And so I was always around art supplies forever. I could do anything that I wanted to. But my thing when I was growing up was acting. I grew up in Southern California, and being an actor, going on auditions, that's just what you do. And so that was sort of my little creative area for most of my life. And then in 2004, I decided that I was tired of auditioning, and I was tired of all the work that came with driving to LA and doing plays with people. And I just wanted a break. That's what I told myself. You know what? I just want to do something easy and something romantic. And so I decided I was just going to make a painting. That's what I said. I was going to make one painting. And so I did. And I was hooked. And then I wanted to make another painting, and then another and another. And before I knew it, I had a collection of paintings, and some of the people around me were telling me that I needed to skip art school entirely and go straight to galleries and start getting shows for myself. And so I did. And I started selling my work, and it basically took off in a way that I never really decided I was quitting acting, but I've never had a chance to go back to it since 2004. So after a couple of years in galleries doing the normal painter thing, I decided that the gallery experience was not for me. And ultimately, I felt that in the future, galleries were not going to be as important as, say, the internet for artists. So in 2009, 2010, I decided I'd had enough of galleries and I began throwing my own shows. I would rent a space in LA and invite everyone I knew, promote it all year long, make a collection for that show, and then do everything myself, pay for everything myself, pay for the alcohol myself. The benefit being that when I sold all my work, I also got to keep all the money instead of giving 50% of it away to a gallery. And I found that the shows that I was throwing for myself were far and away more successful than the shows the galleries were throwing for me. And not only were more people showing up to each event, but I was selling out every time. And that was pretty exciting. That let me know that I really could do this on my own. So in 2013, actually, I had my most successful show yet. And within a month of that show, I stumbled upon Patreon. And I signed up almost immediately and have been pretty much just diving headfirst into Patreon ever since. And I haven't had another show since 2013 because Patreon has not only taken up so much of my time, but it has actually replaced the gallery show income I was making every year. So that's kind of awesome, I think.
Yes, that's super awesome. There's a few things I want to get into, but I like that kind of mentality of going off of the norm, because I think for a lot of creative people, one of the big hangups is this idea of needing permission, or this idea that what made a successful person like 50 years ago, like for a writer, to be published by a publisher, or for an artist to be shown in a gallery, you need that other person to kind of tell you, yep, yeah, you deserve to have this thing. You deserve to do this. So I guess we'll start with the galleries not being as important, and then you just kind of going for it yourself. What were some of the things that surprised you about throwing your own show? About what were some of the things that you didn't expect that kind of hit you, and then maybe some of the things that ended up really not being as big of a deal?
Well, a lot of people actually, I think something that surprised me was the pushback I was getting about becoming independent and moving away from galleries. There were a lot of people in my life who thought, oh, that's a little bit risky. You need the traditional system to support you if you're going to do something as wacky and audacious as being an artist. So I wasn't expecting kind of that element of it, where people were a little bit freaked out about, oh my God, the internet, you're a fine artist. What are you doing on the internet? So that was sort of funny. But the truth of it is, I honestly did not expect it to be as successful as it was. I thought, gosh, this is such a risk. I'm taking all of the responsibility on myself. And if I put in all this work, and it was a massive amount of work, and it wasn't inexpensive to throw my own shows, I thought this is going to be so humiliating. This is going to be such a failure. And I was really, really concerned about that. But I kind of loved the independence of it. I loved being my own director. I loved being in charge of my creative vision for my own shows. And I was really actually pretty good at it. I was throwing better and better shows, and they were really exciting. And I got a lot of really positive feedback from everyone who was attending. And so I realized it's like, gosh, this is not a small thing. This is something that I really need to nurture and turn into something huge. I think is it really just caught me off guard. And I wasn't expecting, at every point in my career, I have been surprised at the positive response I have gotten. And that has been honestly what's pushed me along every step of the way, because I just never really mean to have as much opportunity as I do. And I try to take advantage of it whenever I can.
For sure. Now, so for throwing your own first show, so it's as simple as kind of finding a space and then obviously making the art, obviously
Yes.
putting the work in there, but then just promoting it and then picking a date and then obviously buying, like you said, buying your own booze and stuff like
Right.
that. So it's really that simple for somebody that maybe is thinking of doing it themselves.
Well, the key to it is the promotion and the marketing. You can
Mm-hmm.
throw a really amazing show, but if nobody shows up, then it's not really going to be successful. So what I found worked was to put the show date out a good distance, at least 6 months, maybe, up to 8 or 10 months in advance, and start talking about it then. And immediately tell your closest inner circle about it and be super enthusiastic about what you're doing, and then spread outward from there, telling more and more people. And I would just attack the internet constantly every day, remind people about my show coming up. It doesn't really work as well anymore in this day and age than it did in, say, like 2010 to just blast social media and get a lot of response. But at that time, I was able to gather everyone that I knew who lived in Southern California and get their enthusiasm behind me too. So it is as easy as renting a building and buying the alcohol and making your own paintings, but you really want to stoke that enthusiasm of your audience and be enthusiastic yourself. I really believe that because I was so excited about it and so on fire for what I was doing, my own work, and excited about this show that was coming up, which to me felt like it was going to be a party, a fun time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the part that I think makes it a success, because generally speaking, traditionally, art galleries are known for being a little bit stuffy and boring, and a lot of people just sort of standing around sipping wine and not really knowing how to talk to each other. And
Yeah.
I felt like I don't want to do that. And so I wanted to create much more of a community atmosphere, some place where people felt more comfortable to talk and engage with each other. And I had various tools set up around so people could play with the black lights and be a little bit more interactive with the show, rather than viewing something that's sort of, I don't know, cold and minimalist on the wall. I wanted people to be really moving around, talking to each other, talking about the art, and have it be a festive event. And I think that that's what made people excited to attend the first time. And then when I said, hey, I'm going to do this again next year, everybody was like, oh, cool, that cool party that we went to
Mm-hmm.
last year. And so it just grew and grew every year.
Right. I love that. And yeah, I guess that's a good point to get into your actual art for people that haven't seen it yet or haven't checked it out yet. They definitely should. But could you explain your art to the listeners? Because well, I think it's hard enough to kind of convey the awesomeness of your art just through like images, but let alone like just talking about it. But can you try to do your best to kind of explain what you do with your art? Because I think it's so cool.
Thank you. Yes, it is difficult to explain. I've worked on trying to define it for over a decade. I originally came up with the term light reactive paintings because I didn't know what else to call them. And at the time, and I scoured the internet everywhere I could not find a whole lot of people doing what I was doing. And I didn't want to call what I did blacklight art or glow in the dark, because that's just one part of it. It's a small facet.
It's like a bonus part of it.
It is. It's an extra a bonus part. And so I didn't want that to be the focus, because there are more and more, as time goes on, more and more blacklight artists emerging. And I didn't want to be a blacklight artist. My art, the reason it's light reactive is because it reacts to all different kinds of light, not just black light. So I use different pigments, different layers. I use things like, phosphorescent pigments are what make it blacklight reactive and glow in the dark. I also use things like mylar, which has a very interesting rainbowy shimmer effect. I use crushed glass. I use even things like sand, lava rock, seashells, anything that's gritty and natural to give my art this very organic texture. Ultimately, when all is said and done, my idea is for the painting to morph along with the light every single day. So in the daytime, when the sun is out, the natural ambient light inside will cause the painting to look a certain way, have the colors lean warm or cool, and even reflect the sparkly glass on it or other iridescent aspects. And then at nighttime, when the sun goes down and you flip on your interior lights, the painting has a different tone because it's reflecting the color of the light of your inside bulbs. And then, as you said, bonus, if you have a black light, great. And I know a lot of people who will just flip their black light on in the evening and keep it on along with their regular interior lights. And that is a really cool effect because having the black light on simultaneously, you get to see all the colors. So you get to see the painting as it does in the daytime, plus the black light effect on top of it. And then my favorite part is, of course, when you turn all the lights off, including the black light, it will glow in the dark all night long. And this is not, craft store glow in the dark paint that fades after a few minutes. This is high grade, rare earth minerals that NASA uses and firemen use. So this stuff will stay glowing for 12 hours or more. In fact, I have paintings that I'm working on, and it's really funny because they will just be glowing all night long. And if I have to come downstairs into my studio for any reason in the middle of the night, I don't even have to turn on a light because everything, all my supplies and all my in-process paintings are literally lighting up the room.
That is awesome. It's like you can't escape your art.
No, it's always going.
That's awesome. Well, so how, you mentioned before, you just kind of decided that you just wanted to do something easy, something romantic, and you just wanted to make one painting. So when you made that one painting, did you have this in mind, or is this something that kind of came later? And then how did that start?
It actually was from the very beginning. I'm not entirely sure why. When I decided I wanted to do a painting, I had a vision for what I wanted to do. And I couldn't quite define it, so I just decided to paint it. And from the very first painting I ever made, it was circles, and it was blacklight reactive paints, and I started making things glow in the dark. That's what appealed to me. And at the time that I started painting, I had been making full-scale art installations with a community group that put on art events locally. And so I was actually in charge of making a lot of really interesting art pieces that were experiential rather than just something visual. And so I think I was so influenced by that experience that when I started painting, it made sense to me to bring something experiential into the work rather than just have it be something flat on the wall that you look at and that's it. I wanted the painting to be doing something at all times. I thought it would be pretty cool to be able to produce a painting that was constantly somehow existing in some form or another. You could see the way that it looked no matter what time of day it is.
Right.
Which is neat.
Yeah, I think that's very cool. And so how long did it take you to figure out all the different methods? Because like you said, you use a lot of different things that people wouldn't necessarily think about using. I heard that you actually use cinnamon.
Oh, I have used cinnamon, yes.
So how long did it take you to kind of figure out all those methods and kind of was it trial and error, or did you have to go on some journey around the world to find these materials, or?
It's a lot of it is simply that I am intentionally experimental in my art, and I don't like to master anything. There's a lot of artists out there that do some really incredible work, especially people who are into hyper realism and that sort of thing. And that blows my mind. But my approach to creativity is much more wild and free and without form. And I think every time I sit down to a painting, even when one is commissioned by somebody, I like to have an element of it that I am not even completely familiar with, that I have not mastered yet. I want something that I have to approach as a child, almost very childlike, not knowing how to use the material, having an idea about what I want to do with it, but really having no guarantee of what the outcome is going to be, and then having to deal with whatever it ends up being. That's part of what's really interesting to me about my process. So it is difficult over the long term. I've been doing this almost 14 years now, to not master certain things. You just can't help it. You learn to do things and get better at them. But with each new piece, I try to throw in just a random chaotic element so that it's something that I have to figure out during the process of making the painting. Because to me, the painting has a big story behind it. And that's one of the things that I try to communicate about my art online, is showing the story that develops in the process from blank canvas to finished paintings. With my paintings, there's a lot of layers and a lot of things that are hidden within the painting that you would only know about if, for instance, you followed my Patreon and saw my in-process shots and how the painting was developing over time.
Well, and I think what you're describing is awesome, because a lot of people struggle with this. It's this idea of keeping yourself on your toes and like trying to not necessarily settle in and become like a master at what you're doing, because then it's just like, you just do it over and over again. And it's just like, what's the point of being a creative person if I'm not able to kind of like push myself, or like if I'm just used to doing this, I'm just like a factory, I'm just like pumping out stuff. So I love that. Like, as you're settling in, trying to kind of not settle in, Right.
I prefer to think of myself more as a mad scientist because that's basically how I approach everything that I do. And I think that's a more fun way to be, but that's just me.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned circles, but I was wondering kind of where your inspiration comes from on a daily basis, or like on a piece by piece basis, especially when it's not a commissioned work, when it's something that you can just kind of go at and just do whatever you want. What kind of inspiration do you bring to it?
Well, the thing that I believe I am most fascinated with, and is ultimately the thread connecting all the work I've ever done, which is, I think I've made over 400 paintings at this point.
Oh, wow.
Is the intersection between science and spirituality. I find that very fascinating. And I have had so many wonderful conversations with collectors over the years who are from completely opposing belief systems, who have come to me and told me that my art has opened their mind to something bigger than they'd previously considered. So I've had an atheist, tell me, "Wow, this is the closest I've ever felt to understanding spirituality." And I've had someone who's perhaps someone more traditionally religious, like Christian, tell me that, oh my gosh, never before have I understood how beautiful science is. And those are probably some of the most profound and complimentary things I have ever heard, because that's a big deal for somebody to stretch their minds in a direction that's uncomfortable for them. That's not something that they're used to. And so that element, that place between science and spirituality is really what fascinates me. When actually, before I was painting, I heard a gentleman, his name is Barry Taylor, speaking about the concept of thin spaces. And thin spaces are basically exactly that, the intersection of science and spirituality. It can be something like a beautiful sunset where you're standing there watching it and it's a sunset, it's a ball of gases in our sky setting on our planet, and it can be explained. But there's obviously just so much more going on, and it moves people emotionally. It can also be something less visual, like when a child laughs. There's something magical and special in that moment that is separate and different from all the other normal moments that happen around it. And those tiny moments, those thin spaces, are what I think drives me to create. I think each painting for me is an attempt to create a type of thin space. And in that, for me, circles are sort of the representation of that. I see circles as a reflection of everything in the universe. I say a lot, everything from atoms and molecules to our planet, the moon, the sun, the orbit of our solar system, the orbit of our galaxy, even time moves in cycles. Everything is a circle. And so that's something I believe that, in essence, all of us can really agree on, that a circle is a pretty steadfast shape within the universe. And I think that that indicates something pretty interesting about what the circle means, perhaps in a higher sense, of which I don't know, but that's why I'm an artist. I'm just sort of exploring my feelings on what I think it means.
Right. Well, you're speaking my language now, Shayla. 'Cause, like, for anybody who like reads anything I've written, like, that's like exactly what I try to think about all the time. And I love that idea of thin spaces. It's like trying to find that one little poetic phrase or that one little image or that one story that you can share that just like penetrates another human being that could be on like the other side of like every other belief that you have. Just finding that one little thread that can connect you and make you see that you are on this like same planet, like together, like trying to figure out the same stuff at the same time. And like the sunset thing is something I think about all the time too. Not only like the fact that you just realize that you're on this like just like this ball that's rotating around this sun, but the sun's not even setting. It's like you that's rotating away from it. Right. Just like puts you right into perspective, and it's like you can see it on the other side of your existence like the next day. It's just it's great stuff.
So amazing. I mean, I honestly am inspired by TV shows that are about astrophysics. I like reading science articles, and I'm such a nerd too. Such a geek about that kind of stuff. And I can get up, on a Sunday morning and read a really heavy 10-page article on some weird esoteric theory about the universe, and that's exciting to me. So I definitely have a geeky side that inspires all the rest of it.
I'm right there with you. I love it. Well, okay, so something that I wanted to ask you, I kind of alluded to it before. Do you ever get angry or like struggle with sharing your work online, like in image form? You do use animated GIFs and videos, but like when it comes to trying to portray the different dimensions of like the change that happens in your art from, season to season, day to day, or night to day, I should say, do you find that like anything short of seeing it in person kind of falls short?
Oh, always. It's always going to be that way. We don't have the technology yet to show my art properly on the internet. I definitely do the best I can. I try to get as many angles as possible. I try to show video in different lighting and give as much of the experience of moving around the painting as I can. But ultimately it's impossible because there is no way yet with our technology, although it's getting better, for camera lenses to pick up the proper depth and color of something that your eye is looking at. It's just not even close. So I mostly feel that for visual artists, we are going to have to work extra hard to show ourselves on the internet because it just doesn't translate in the same way that something digital does. A song from a musician, you can put it on the internet and it's done in its finished form. Of course, it doesn't have a lot of the fun parts of a live show, but you still are getting the complete song that you can hear really well in your headphones, and it's not really going to get much better than that. With visual artists, you can do a damn fine job trying to show your work as best you can, but it's never going to be the same as standing in front of it and being able to work or walk around it, rather. And so that's very frustrating for me, and it requires more work every single day. But I think of it as a way to learn too. I enjoy figuring out how to tell my story. And so it is a challenge, but it requires me to be more creative and more clever and really try to think outside the box. Like, how can I make this more interesting? So it stretches my own skills, and then as a result, I have more skills. So I kind of like that part, because I've had to learn so much video and so much editing over the years that now I have all of these extra skills too, which really only helps me be able to market myself online. So it works out.
For sure. That brings us perfectly into Patreon and kind of how you, I guess, didn't like kind of stumble into it, but you kind of like went full force into it. As you said, you were like there day one. So how has Patreon helped you not only as like to be able to like get away from like the gallery thing, but also to be able to communicate with your audience and to communicate your own communication with yourself through your art and being able to kind of share the whole process of art making?
Well, one of the things that I think is easier about sharing on Patreon is that anyone who's there and listening wants to hear from you. These are people that you know are interested in hearing and seeing more from you. Whereas sometimes on social media, it's kind of hard to know if you're posting something for people that want to see it or just this kind of random into the crowd and hoping that, like, I don't know, the right people are going to see it. And when you don't get the right response from it, it kind of feels a little icky inside, because you think, am I just selling? Is my message coming off correctly? And there's a lot of self-consciousness, at least for me, that comes along with it. Whereas on Patreon, I know that they're there to hear from me. These people are paying me to continue and to make more art and to go bigger and farther. And I feel like that confidence is something that I've not felt anywhere else online. And it's easier for me to open up and be vulnerable with my patrons, because I have treated Patreon as the most special thing that I have on the internet. If you want to find anything about me, primarily my art, yes, but I do talk about more personal things in my life with my patrons, because that's where I want to nurture and build my community. My patrons honestly feel like friends and family. And I'm not just saying that. They've become so, important and intrinsic to who I am. Over the years with Patreon, my patrons have done things like stuck with me when I was very, very ill and could not work. And with any other job, not being able to work, you don't get a pass with that. You would lose your job or have a lot of difficulty. And as an artist, if you get sick, it's even harder, because what do? You can't work, you can't do anything. But patrons are so supportive, so generous, and would just keep me going whenever I was down. And so it's a completely different situation. And I'm so grateful for a place online where I do feel comfortable. I do feel like it's okay to be vulnerable and show that part of my life that really influences the reasons why I make art and the art that I choose to make. Sharing art is a very vulnerable thing. And I think for a lot of artists, sharing the process of it is even worse. It's one thing to show a finished painting that you feel is complete and that has all the finishing touches on it and say, haha, this is my work. But to show something at every point along the way, which includes all of the mistakes and all of the ugly, messy parts, I think is harder for some people. But it's such a beautiful thing. And what Patreon is doing is opening up this dialogue between artist and patron where we can have that vulnerability and that sharing, that relationship, rather than just a financial transaction. People get to know who you are as a human being, and you get to know them. It's this really beautiful, symbiotic relationship situation that has only grown for me ever since starting Patreon. So I find that if people are willing to just really dive in and show themselves, the response is actually going to be very positive and very supportive, I think.
Absolutely. And it's interesting too, like how just $1 like a month or whatever, like when you put some kind of monetary thing where like it's like this proof of stake. It's like this proof that like, yes, you are valuable to me enough that I want to put a little bit of money to you just as like a kind of a show of gratitude almost, or a show of that I want to be a part of your life. Because I think sometimes it's difficult, like you said, when you're posting on Instagram and you're getting likes, you're getting comments, it's kind of a dark thing to say, but like you don't know exactly like why you're getting likes necessarily. You don't know if somebody's commenting, like why are they commenting? Do they really like what I'm doing? Or like are they just trying to get like a re-comment or a re-like or a re-follow or whatever? And on Patreon I found that like that's where like the buck stops, like that's where for sure this person is invested in you, not just monetarily, but like emotionally, and they want to follow your journey. So that does give you that kind of like trust tree
Yes.
where you can kind of open up. So it's not just like being able to kind of finance your artistic life, but it gives you that place where you're able to kind of push further and be more vulnerable and share your journey and help other people out too by sharing your journey and showing exactly what you're going through, exactly how the thing is done, to show that it's not just like, okay, like here's the piece I finished and here it is on Instagram. It's like, here's the process. Here's what I went through, and here's where it is from, idea to like completion and then beyond.
And it's such an honoring situation. I feel so humbled by my patrons that it's really difficult for me to not want to work harder and produce more, be more prolific, do as much as I can, because if my patrons have that kind of confidence in me, then I want to honor it back by doing the best I can and growing this situation into something bigger and bigger, and continue to make my patrons not just entertained, but satisfied and happy to be involved. And that's what I think is important.
Absolutely. It's building that mini community around like the thing that you kind of put into the world when you decided to make that first piece.
Right.
It's just like seeing how much of a community you can build and how big the thing can grow.
For sure.
Well, we mentioned a couple of like the resistances that maybe have held you back. But I wonder, are there any others? I can't help but mention this tweet that you put out a few days ago. It says, sometimes I wish I had an art style that would let me sit down and make a complete thing in one night. Haven't figured that out yet. So is like, that's something that kind of like gets at you, that you're like, oh man, why did I decide to put so much effort into this thing to have it, be seen at 24 hours a day, 365 days a year,
Yeah, well, and it gets a little bit daunting because when each painting takes many, many, many months to complete, and the more I have of them, the longer each one takes, because there's so many steps involved. And I love the idea where, like, plein air artists, for instance, they can go set up at the beach and sit down for a couple hours and poof, they have a complete thing at the end of it. And that's fascinating to me. I don't know that that's something I ultimately am going to be moving towards, because in many ways, I think that the time and the struggle I go through is specifically connected to my art. And I don't know that it would have the same effect if I was able to run through it more quickly. But one of the resistance issues I think that I've been facing a lot lately, it's funny because when I first started in this, I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't know what the rules were and what, where my place was in the art world. So I didn't listen to any of it and just kind of burst onto the scene, which was a really good move on my part. But now it's kind of gone the opposite way, where the larger my audience gets, the more I feel like, oh God, people are watching, I better not fuck this up.
Pressure's on.
Yes. So it gets actually harder at times, and I really have to battle with just staying true to what I know and what I've been doing, and really try to push through, which is apropos to your show.
You won.
No, push through no matter what. A lot of times what I will do when I'm feeling that resistance is to do something really bold, submit to something, that is perhaps above my level, or meet people that are really influential and have a lot to teach me. I try to just make big moves so as to get over the little bits of scaredness. I think it was Merlin Mann who said, be scared of more interesting things. And one of the best ways in my life to flip that resistance and that feeling of wanting to stop yourself from doing things is kind of to jump into it before you're even ready, before you know what's going on, and then having to deal with it after the fact. I call it like I'm throwing my hat over the fence, and then I have to figure out how to get it after that. That's the best way, honestly, for me to just get over it is pretty much, if you're sending an important proposal, or you have a project that, maybe you feel really passionate about, but you don't know that your audience is going to like it as well. I will do the close my eyes and hit publish and just let it be, and like walk away and understand that sure, all could go to hell, but like I just have to keep making those leaps. And it's really worked out for me in the long run. It is scary, but I think people could benefit a lot from, well, as Merlin Mann said, be scared of more interesting things. Sitting at home being worried that people aren't going to like what I do is not very interesting. Doing big things like trying to make my place in the world and become involved with bigger organizations is definitely something that counteracts those little tiny anxieties that really shouldn't be taking up our day.
Right. No, I completely agree. It's if you ever have those moments where you're like, oh shit, like is there a way to unsend that email, right, or is there a way to like unpublish this thing that I just said I was going to do? I think that means you're on the right path,
right?
Because you will. I love that idea of like figuring it out after you've kind of committed to something. I've been doing that recently, and it's scary, but it's important to do, like to shake it up, because when you do feel like you're settling in, that's the only way to kind of like shake things up again. And
right.
What you said as well is like not having an audience is like the most liberating thing for people. I think when people reach out to me and they're like, well, nobody's following me and I don't know what to do, like that's like the best time, like
Yes.
to really embrace that time, because it's a good thing nobody's looking yet, because when they start looking, that's when you're going to feel that extra pressure.
Yes.
So just like really enjoy that time and go all out, do whatever you want, like really push it at that point.
Oh yeah, go completely nuts. I mean, when you have the opportunity where no one is watching, you can do anything. You can play around with anything that you want to, and it doesn't matter because it's all just fun. And that's what I think creativity should be about. Ultimately, that place where you were 5 years old and you wanted to make something, that's the place that I think ideally artists should be able to access when creating, because I think that's probably a good representation of who we are as creative people, is who we were when we were children and saw the world with just such wonder and imagination.
No audience, so don't just take off your hat, take off all your clothes and throw them over
Right.
the fence.
Exactly.
Before we get to the final push, you mentioned being ill and not being able to work for a while. I was wondering, could you talk about that and how you were able to get through that, aside from, the support of your patrons, kind of that experience?
Oh gosh. Well, it was a really awful experience. I hope to never go through again. What ultimately happened was I had an allergic reaction that had been simmering for at least 6 months to a year that I didn't know about. And I began feeling more and more fatigued, tired, felt like I had a cold for just months and months at a time. And then a rash broke out on my face. And it's horrifying. If you're a patron, you can see a photo. And there's also a photo, I think, in a London video I put out recently, but it's not pretty. But it forced me to spend about 2 months pretty much just bedridden. I couldn't really open my eyes. I couldn't talk very much. And I was scared because I wasn't able to post on Patreon. I wasn't able to communicate as much as I wanted to. And it was a really, really frightening time. And I was not sure that I was going to be able to go on with my business. And the only thing I could figure out to do during that time was basically tell my patrons that. Just tell them like, oh my God, my face is fucked up right now. I can't move. I don't know what to do. I'm really scared. Thank you for sticking with me. I will be pushing through this. I'm still working where I can. I did a big magazine interview even when I was sick that Gwen wrote, actually.
Oh, cool.
And it was a tough period, but I just kind of stuck through it and tried to be honest with my patrons, and they were there for me. And so it helped me realize that, okay, I have this support. I can keep going. It probably was very effective in healing me once we knew what was going on with me physically, because immediately, since everything wasn't falling to hell after having been sick, I was able to just keep going, like step right back into it and get right back to where I was. And it's been going better and better ever since.
Well, good. I'm glad you're feeling better. And I think when things like that, whether it's like a sickness or just like some kind of life happening,
Yes.
I think sometimes there's one voice in a creative person's head that says, all right, this is like a perfect excuse to like, since you're taking this break, to like, just take the break for the rest of your life.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Just like quit. Like great time to stop. This is the universe telling you to stop.
Yeah.
Would you have any advice for anybody that has that thought in their head?
Don't stop. It sounds so simple and kind of irritating when you're in that spot and that's what people are telling you. But that is the answer. Seriously, that is the difference between successful artists and not successful artists, is the successful ones just keep going. That is the only difference. If you stop, you've guaranteed that you've failed, that you guaranteed that your dream of being an artist, or even just having a creative part of your life, you've guaranteed it won't happen. The trick is just to keep going. I know it feels awful sometimes, and it feels like, God, this is never going to get better. And the only thing that you can do is remind yourself that, okay, there's a lot of successful people that have said this, and that their advice was that I just kept going. I had failure after failure after failure after failure. Jack's keynote, speaking of PatreCon, he was talking about all the millions of duds he's had in his career that exist in between the successes, and that the duds are so much more, and so more often. But ultimately, over time, those little moments of success are the things that shape your career. Nobody's going to be remembering the duds. They're only going to be remembering the body of work that you've put together over time. That's very important.
Absolutely. And speaking of PatreCon, can you talk about that? Because I think I try to promote a lot of people on that listen to the show that haven't started a Patreon to do it. Like, just because it doesn't cost anything to like start a Patreon, and then you can just have a new platform to maybe kind of have that like kind of braver platform to be able to kind of share your story or share what you're going through or share your process. So can you talk about PatreCon, what that was like? Is there like access for people to like check out what happened there?
There will be, as far as I know. All of the speeches will be put online at some point. I think if you go to patreon.com, they have the sign up list if you want to get first notice about when those speeches are online. So definitely do that, because there's a lot of really, really great stuff there. This PatreCon was a lot different than last PatreCon. I've been 2 years in a row, the first one and the second one. The first one was made up of 40 creators that were invited. And the second one, I think, was about 130 creators. So it was massively bigger. And it was definitely overwhelming at times, because it's breathtaking to be in a room with that many talented people all
it's
doing
too much.
Yes, it gets intimidating. I mean, you're standing there and all of these people are kicking ass at what they're doing. On some level, they're kicking ass. That's why they're here in this room at this event. So it's inspiring, because you're talking to everyone there and learning about their process, learning about their daily schedules, what works for them, what doesn't. And then also feeling like, gosh, I'm really not doing that correctly, and I need to make some changes. But it's this wonderful 2-day think tank where everybody just comes together, and everyone is so grateful to be there, so inspired and enthusiastic about Patreon. And we all just come together, and it's love. It's just this little happiness fest of all of us so excited that we get to be artists, so excited that we're meeting other artists and learning. We're all scribbling in our notebooks, trying to get down these just drops of wisdom that some of the speakers were doling out to us. And ever since, I have been on fire, and my workload by choice has probably more than tripled, because I've just been so excited to get back to it, to work harder, to re-envision my entire career. So it definitely has a strong effect on those who attend, and I'm really grateful to have been invited. I definitely encourage people to check out the speeches. And not only that, but Patreon puts out a lot of information on their blogs and in their emails that help people and give a lot of tips on how to really work Patreon in a way that is appropriate for them, because it actually is different for all of us depending on what our creative genre is. There's different ways to sort of tackle the Patreon issue. And I think ultimately what I believe is the best thing to do is to learn from anybody and everybody. I think people get stuck a little bit in their own genre, and the musicians will only follow the musicians, and the podcasters only follow the podcasters, the painters only follow the painters, and so on. I have learned so much by following people who are not in my genre. In fact, I specifically try to follow more musicians and scientists and journalists and writers and podcasters than I do painters, because I feel like, well, I know a lot about the genre that I'm in. I've been doing it for a while. What I want to learn is what other people are doing and how I can take their approach and kind of internalize it for my own use and then translate it into something that works for my particular business. I think that's crucial, to get outside input from people that you don't know as well and aren't as maybe, I don't know, even into. There's a lot of people that I follow on Patreon whose work I don't even really like all that much, but I think they're fantastic at what they do. I think they're fantastic artists. I love the way that they communicate with their audience. I think they're really smart about how they market themselves. And I just admire them on so many other levels that I want to support them and learn from them just as much as someone who I might be able to learn more painterly things from.
Right. Any kind of art or creativity, it's like all about not stealing,
right?
But that's what all art is just like taking from what inspires you and like kind of meshing it into like your own.
Right.
And that same goes for like promotion or Patreon. And yeah, the other neat trick about that, like kind of taking or being inspired by people that are not in your genre, it feels a little bit easier to kind of like imitate them,
right?
Or to like take their tricks because you think maybe your audience, doesn't look at that person anyway.
Right.
So there's no chance of them kind of catching that overlap.
True. And I'm one of those people that I don't like to be influenced by anyone too similar to me. So part of the reason that I don't follow a lot of painters and traditional artists is because I really, really, truly don't want their influence, because it happens automatically and sort of instinctually.
Human nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I try to just be conscious of the information I'm putting into my brain about this, because I think it's easy to get stuck and just sort of spinning in one little area. And I want all of us as artists to be able to branch out as far as we can.
For sure. And yeah, so we'll have that linked up if people want to check out Patreon, yourcreativepush.com/Shayla Maddox. And yeah, even if you're not interested in going to Patreon per se, but you want to, I think it's really important for people to get out there in the real world. We talked a lot about like kind of settling in and just kind of getting used to the everyday grind, I guess, of being a creative person. And a lot of times, the only interactions you have are with people online. But when you can do something like Patreon or anything like that and go to like a conference or be surrounded by other people that are already on the same wavelength as you, it just not only like gives you that wisdom that you can gain from them, but that energy that you get from like physically being like kind of in the same jurisdiction as all these other people. And you can feed off of that. Like you said, when it's over, you still have that energy with you and you can just double or triple your kind of output.
It's instant caffeine. I've not experienced this much energy in a long time. So for sure, you feed off each other when creative people are around. There's just a buzz in the air, and it's really amazing.
Yeah, I think for especially introverted people, it's a tough thing to do to kind of sign up for something like that, or even buy a plane ticket to go do something like that. Yep. But if you can kind of have that, oh my God, can I cancel that purchase kind of moment? Right. I think that again, that's you're on the right path. Yeah,
and you're always going to have to do things you're scared of doing. That's just life. That's any path to success is just. Yeah, it's scary. I'm very introverted and antisocial a lot of the time. So that doesn't help when I'm in these situations. So I just completely ignore it and become a different person. I become an outgoing person. And because you need to, it's what will enrich you and improve and evolve your own career, your own life, even your creativity. And yeah, for sure.
Shayla, it is time for the final push. And this is where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today. Just give them your best final words of advice and really push them to pursue their own creative passions.
Well, we discussed earlier about just don't stop. And there's something that is important in that, but it goes so much deeper too. I think people tend to be a little bit focused on the outcome and whether or not they will be successful. I think that's dangerous. I think that people need to every day find that place in them where creativity is a joy and where they would be pursuing it passionately, regardless of who was watching. If we were still in, 1987 and we didn't have the ability to talk to everyone in the world on a moment's notice, whatever art you would make in that situation, that's the kind of art that you should be making now. And that's the kind of effort that you should be putting into it. As much passion as you would for whatever amazing, important person you would love to view your art, you need to be putting that much passion into it by yourself and believing that nobody's going to be looking at it, because that's where you find the true expression of you, not an expression of what people want. And it's where the true art is. And it's the only way, in my opinion, to make something that is real art in so many ways. It has to be that thing that lights you up. There's a video online that I'm not sure if any of your guests have mentioned before, but it's a life-changing video. It's called Painting in the Dark by Adam Westbrook. Look up Painting in the Dark Part 3. And this video is about the differences in what we determine as success living in the internet age versus what is ultimately success internally as an artist. And they use Van Gogh as an example. And I don't want to give too much of it away because the video essay itself is very moving. But most of us know the story of Van Gogh. And it's a sad, depressing story, and where he didn't make any money and didn't sell anything. I think he sold one painting before he died. And of course, his mental health continued to deteriorate. And so we sort of look at Van Gogh and think, oh, success, he's one of the classics. But the truth of the matter is that he actually had a life filled with struggle, and certainly not something that anybody would judge as success while he was alive. But the thing that he was amazing at is he just didn't stop. He just kept passionately making new art and studying and learning from different people. And he was pretty much literally starving, as the cliched starving artist goes, but he did not stop. And his work improved, and it just kept going and going and going and going. Unfortunately, he died before he saw the success, but now we have Van Gogh. And so it is hard to think in those terms. People want some sort of immediate reaction, immediate success. And ideally, with tools that we have like Patreon now, we won't all have to be dead before our art is successful. But the message really is that the amount of likes you're getting on Instagram, or the weird attention that we associate as accomplishment on the internet, it's all not real. None of that is real. It's such a strange way to approach one's art career, I think. And I hope for everybody to find a place where they can block out all of those numbers, those clicks, those likes, all of that type of data, and just make the art. Make the art that you want to make and just focus on that. The rest actually does come very naturally. And if you're enthusiastic about what you do and you love what you do, it's going to show to everyone else. And there's nothing you can do to fake it. There's no series of steps or a listicle online or a blog somewhere that's going to be able to tell you how to do that. You just have to passionately believe in yourself and believe in yourself outwardly. And other people will too. Like a fireball, it will just grow. And that's what you need to hold on to.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. It's especially like if you put something out there that doesn't really stick, that doesn't get all these likes, and you can look back at it and be like, wow, like I really like this thing. Why didn't it get so many likes?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you can look back at it and still be like, I like this thing, like that's a success right there. Like that the likes didn't matter, like the amount of views it got didn't matter. The fact that you still like it, that you still have that taste for it,
Right.
like you're satisfying your own taste. So just keep doing that over and over again. That's really all that matters at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And nobody's going to like everything you do. And that's just something that people ultimately have to get over, because it's just not going to happen. And so don't worry about those people.
Screw them.
Yep.
They're not a part of the trust tree.
No, they're not. They
Cool.
don't even matter.
Shayla, thank you so much for coming on the show today and for giving us that push. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. I really, really feel wonderful when I'm able to talk to other people about this, because I feel very passionately that others can really forge a path for themselves in this new world we live in. So
Yes, they can. Thank you for helping us.
Absolutely.
You can find Shayla on her website, which is shaylamaddox.com, SHAYLAMADDOX.com, or on Patreon. She is Shayla Maddox. We'll have all that linked up at today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Shayla Maddox. Shayla, thanks again.
Yay. Thank you so much.
Whew, did I not tell you that there would be inspiration coming from all different angles in this episode? Really important final push, and I love all the stuff about Patreon, but I just want to reiterate the idea of just jumping in, throwing your hat over the fence, and then figuring it out. I love that. And that doesn't just go for starting a creative thing, starting a creative life even. It's also for when you are months or years into it. And like we were talking about in the episode, when it feels like you're kind of settling in or beginning to really master the thing that you're doing. Shake it up and get uncomfortable and push your art, push your creativity, and also your career. Give yourself those new opportunities by putting yourself out there. Building a safe community where you can be vulnerable, like on Patreon, is a great thing. And perhaps you should see that as building practice on how to be vulnerable so that you can put yourself out there into new uncharted territories where you don't know what the result is going to be, where you don't know, where you aren't sure that you're going to get a loving response from your trusted community. You really need to venture out. And also, again, I wanted to reiterate what we mentioned about having no audience. It is so true that a lot of you that reach out say that's your biggest resistance, your biggest kind of hindrance, the fact that you don't have an audience yet. But it is truly your time to go wild, to go nuts, because once you do start building that audience, it does feel like you're in the spotlight and you don't have enough wiggle room, I guess, to really experiment because you're worried about losing some of that audience. It makes it harder to put yourself in that position that Shayla was talking about, that vulnerable position of challenging yourself, of doing something that you haven't mastered yet. But when you don't have that audience, you can go wild, you can go nuts. And I think that's when you will start to see an audience begin to form around this new thing that you are creating by pushing yourself. Shayla talked about loving circles. And I think that this whole pushing yourself and experimenting and playing around really falls in line with building an audience in this circular pattern. They come to you because of this voice that you are creating. They see this thing that you're trying to do and they latch on. And once they give you that proof that, yes, this thing that you're trying out, yes, it's working. Yes, we appreciate it. Yes, we love it. That gives you the confidence to continue to do that thing, to figure out the path, the direction that you do want to go down, to find your unique voice. It's not by doing the same exact thing that everybody else is doing or the thing that you think will attract more people because it's been successful for other people. No, you have to find your own unique voice, and you do that by playing around. The audience comes to you, and then the audience gives you that energy to keep going. The trick is to continue to push it, to start a new circle. Once you do feel like you're settling in, to challenge yourself. Don't worry about whether the people that you've kind of brought in are going to continue to follow you. You have to do what feels right to yourself. You have to please yourself first, even if that means getting a little bit uncomfortable. Again, like I teased in the beginning of the episode, next week we have Gwen Siemel back on the show. If you missed her first episode, you definitely have to check it out. We'll have it linked up at the show notes page today at yourcreativepush.com/269, along with everything we talked about with Shayla. Or you can get to it directly by going to yourcreativepush.com/26. Or if you want to check out Gwen's work, you can head to her website, gwensiemel.com. That's GWENNSEEMEL.com. Or on Instagram, she is Gwen Paints. Speaking of Patreon, I have been following Gwen on Patreon. I've been her patron for about 2 years now, since she was last on the show. And she constantly puts out inspirational, motivational, and educational material for her patrons, things that she has learned along her journey. And we talk at length about some of the things that I cherry-picked, some of my favorite posts and videos that she has made from her Patreon page for you all next week. But that is all I've got for you today, so hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done. Challenge yourself, get uncomfortable, and we will see you next time if you need the push again. I love you all so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.